Is there anything that I said I would check on last week that I? No. Oh.
Yeah.
I'll see. There are poll everywhere questions that should be up if you want to look at them. We'll talk about them. Okay, all right, let's get started. So we're going over poll everywhere questions for some review from chapter 18. Problem set 5 is up. I sent out an email about it on Thursday. You didn't need to start it, but a couple of people asked if I could send it out. So I did that on Thursday or Friday. Hope you guys had a good break. So problems set 5 is due. Recitation week 8 this week, because I know we just have like missed one. So just wanted to be clear, we're doing week 8, which should be up online. And the sheet is available on Sakai. You might have to mix and match the last recitation or just maybe do it as a review. I haven't figured it out yet because I mistimed everything a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. It won't affect you guys in any way though, so don't worry about it. But just keep your eyes open if you don't regularly attend recitation, but you want to do the sheet for what we'll do next week. Before we get started, going over chapter 19 monetary policy, are there any questions? Okay, so today we're gonna, 2 weeks. I was gonna put it's on the reminders at the end, but 2 weeks from today. Okay, so 2 Mondays from now. We have chapter 19, chapter 20, and then 3 more chapters to go over. The one today, and then 2 more after that for material. So I'm going to talk about this more at the end, but definitely make sure that you're starting to review, especially the stuff that maybe like through chapter 16. Make sure you have that all down so that the next stuff that we're going over now, you can really be preparing for, okay? Just like on the last exam, the first couple of chapters were kind of like laying the foundation, and then the bulk of a lot of things that were going on, and we were being tested on, were in the last like 3 or 4 chapters, right? So that's where we're at right now. So make sure that as the material is coming at you kind of quick, you have time to go over it and help yourself by making sure that you already know all of the previous material, right? Because it's going to be important to know it, but we're going to be moving forward on stuff, okay? So yeah, really make sure that's the case. I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time. We're going to have a review session beforehand. The week before, Ishan and I will both have extra office hours. So it'll be, the exam will be structured in the same way, a similar number of questions, a similar, like hopefully difficulty level, similar preparation, right? So for those of you who want to be as prepared as possible, I highly suggest you read through the notes, you read the book. If in the book you're like, wait, we didn't cover this really from the notes, then don't focus on it too much, okay? Because I'm not trying to throw any trap surprises at you guys. And then if you're like, I need to do practice, you can do some long practice questions, both in the book and on Achieve. And then definitely the multiple choice, good practice will be through Achieve. Obviously, that's already accounting for the fact that we have 3 problem sets. Like, so we have this 5th one, and then we're gonna have 1 more. That material should be helpful for you. And then you have the recitation worksheets, which are very similar to, some of them are even old, long, like short answer questions. So all that to say, you have a lot of review that you can do. And if you want to do well on the test, if you want to like ensure that you do well on the test and you don't want to come to the test surprise, just know that it's going to be very similar to the last test. You should prepare in a very similar way. And I'll say this before every class until we have the test in 2 weeks. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So we're going to go over chapter 19, but let's first do some review here. This is a question we're going to do, but let's talk about the poll everywhere questions first. Stop. Okay. Okay. Let's plot the answers here. Okay, so first question, changes to the price of electricity will lead to a shift in long run aggregate supply, a shift in aggregate demand, a shift in short run aggregate supply, a shift in money demand. Okay, so this one's just testing our knowledge of the shifters of aggregate supply and aggregate demand. The price of electricity is an input price. Input prices are shifters of short run aggregate supply. So we'll see a shift in the short run aggregate supply. The idea here is, first thing that I want to say for the first one, shift in long run aggregate supply. One thing we need to remember, prices do not influence long run aggregate supply, okay? We should immediately, that's, if we ever see the word price and shift in long run aggregate supply, we should immediately know that's not what we're looking for, okay? Long run aggregate supply is like what we can produce. It's our potential output, right? It's how much we can produce at a potential. If I change the number on a price of something, that should not affect how productive we can be in the long run, right? It has nothing to do with our skills, the number of people that we have, anything like that, right? Like, it's just a number that's changing on a screen or on a board somewhere for something, okay? So it's not going to affect our potential long run output, okay? And as far as shift in aggregate demand goes, just got to remember the shifts in aggregate demand are changes in wealth, changes in expectations about prices. So that's expectations about prices. This is saying that we have an input price change. So if you think that there's going to be inflation tomorrow, that might influence aggregate demand today. Those types of things. And then a shift in money demand. We're going to talk more about the money. We're going to revisit the shifts in money demand today because I realized in office hours that maybe I didn't do the best job explaining it. So we'll talk more about that one today. Okay. All right, next question. The process by which the aggregate economy gets back to long run equilibrium on its own is called, okay, pretty much everybody here put the self-correcting mechanism. Just remember that open market operations, that's something that the Federal Reserve can do, right? To shift money supply, which will end up shifting to aggregate demand. Okay, then we have the money creation process, which is just something like a different topic that we talked about, right? Where we see if you make a deposit into a bank, then you eventually have this like cascading effect. We can look at the money multiplier to see what the eventual overall effect will be. Okay. And then we had short run equilibrium, which is just that is, we will get back to the short run equilibrium, but in the self-correcting mechanism, but it'll be a shift of equilibrium. Okay. Okay, so there's one more question that I want to go over here just to highlight, and you guys are going to work on this on your own. So if you have a piece of paper or something, and you can work on it with the people sitting next to you as well. But suppose the money market has a demand equation of little I, right? I is the price of money, right? It's the opportunity cost of money, and the opportunity cost is the true price of something. That's something that we learned when we were talking about the first principles of economics, right? Okay, and a supply equation of QM equals 90. I want you to solve for the equilibrium interest rate. And then suppose the government buys $10 worth of T-bills and the reserve ratio is 50%. Solve for the eventual change in the interest rate. I'll give you guys a hint. You're going to need to solve for how that shifts money supply or money demand first, okay? Okay, so go ahead and work on that. I'll walk around if you have questions. We're gonna spend like a good chunk, like 5-6 minutes on this and talk to the people sitting next to you, and then we'll work through it together, okay? If you're stuck on the first part, my hint is it's exactly like solving for any supply and demand market, right? The equilibrium, okay? So just apply things that we already know. What is the equilibrium? How do we solve for it to this one? Okay. I'm gonna change this. I'm sorry if you already did it. There's a problem. $2. Let's call it $2 worth of T-bills. Not bad. All right, let's spend like another 2 minutes on it. Okay, let's talk about it. So first thing we need to do is we need to solve for the equilibrium interest rate. Just remember that the in general, the money market looks something like this, money market, right, where we have money demand. And then we have the money supply has this unique feature that it's perfectly inelastic, right? Right, it's perfectly inelastic because the quantity of money does not depend on the price of money or the opportunity cost, which is the interest rate, okay? Again, that makes sense because we talked about who controls the money supply, the Federal Reserve. And even just think about it intuitively, if a random number changes, not a random number, but a number, even if it's as important as an interest rate, changes all of a sudden, just like that, something causes it to shift, that doesn't all of a sudden mean that there's more checkable deposits, more currency in circulation, right? Like it's not like all of this just magically appears. It comes through the central bank, which controls the money supply, okay? So we need to find the equilibrium interest rate, I star, okay? That's where the money supply and money demand cross. So whenever you have two equations that cross one another, you just need to what? To solve for the equilibrium. Set the two equations equal to each other. That'll solve and get you the equilibrium interest rate and the equilibrium quantity. Well, we know the quantity is going to be 90, right? Because it's perfectly inelastic. So we say I star equals 100 minus 90. So I star equals 10%. Okay. I didn't say it was in percentages here, but it's always going to be in percents. Okay. Okay. Next part of the question. Now, suppose the government buys $2 worth of T-bills and the reserve ratio is 50%. Solve for the eventual change in the equilibrium interest rate. Okay. Well, what do I do here? What's the first step? What's the first thing? Was anybody able to get started on this one?
The initial excess reserve over the reserve ratio. That's the only thing I can think.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So that's the idea, right? Because we're trying to figure out, right? We have this new deposit. Okay. This new deposit that's coming in, right? We talked about this last week. We talked about it in terms of just a personal deposit or personal loan, right? But when the Federal Reserve buys T-bills, they're taking those bills from the bank and they are depositing money into the bank. Okay, money that wasn't previously in the money supply. So really close. I'm gonna clarify here, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. So, and I think you should write this down because I have to erase it. If the initial deposit is not already in the money supply, then it's included in the change in money supply. Okay, so what does that mean, right? Last week we talked about to get the eventual change in the money supply from an initial deposit, you can do two things. You can either take 1 over the reserve ratio, which is the money multiplier, and multiply that by the initial deposit, okay? And then subtract the initial deposit from that amount. Or you could take the initial excess reserves, right? That'll be eventually loaned back out. And you can take that times the money multiplier or 1 over the reserve ratio. Okay, is everybody like, okay, yeah, I remember this? Okay, so the reason why we have to subtract off the initial deposit or we have to use the initial excess reserves is because we have that money was already in the money supply. If we have money that's coming from like somewhere else in the money supply, I will make it clear, or I will say anytime that it comes from the monetary policy, anytime it comes from the Federal Reserve, it's not already in the money supply. In general, I will try to say something like not already in the money supply or something like that, okay? To make it clear that the initial deposit wasn't a part of the money supply. So, so we need to include the initial deposit in this case. And so we say, okay, we have the money multiplier, or MM, is equal to 1 over the reserve ratio, which in this case is going to be 2. Okay, we're depositing $2 worth of T-bills, or we're depositing $2, which, you know, you can think of as $2 billion or something, and if we were going on a real scale. So the eventual change in the money supply is going to be equal to 2 times $2, which equals $4. Okay, so now what does that mean? Well, it means that our money supply equation up here is going to change to QM equals 90 plus 4, or 94. Okay? Yeah, because this is, so we have the money multiplier equals 1 over the reserve ratio, okay, which in this case is 1 over 0.5, which is 2. Okay, and that money, that's telling us how much from an initial deposit or from initial excess reserves, depending on whether it was already part of the money supply, that's telling us what our eventual change in the money supply will be. Yeah.
So we're gonna get the excess reserves, right? Would it be excess reserves divided by what is that ratio times the number of times?
Yeah, but in this case, okay. Let me think here for a sec. Okay, so we need to step back from the example that we talked about last week, okay? Because last week we were talking about if a person has money that they got from whatever, a job or something like that, and then they go and they deposit that money into the bank, okay? Then we have this money creation process. If you want to find the eventual change, that money that they had already, like maybe they got paid wages, but those wages already were in the money supply because they came from somebody, from a bank, from a company's checkable deposits. So the reason why we need to use the initial excess reserves or the initial deposits need to be subtracted off are because that money was already in the money supply. So that first deposit doesn't count as part of the change. And it's just an accounting rule that it works in such a way that you can take the initial excess reserves, okay? It's like an algebra trick. Okay, but we're talking about, like, as far as intuition goes, we need to be thinking about what the actual eventual change is going to be. And here we're saying, okay, we would have had to subtract off the initial deposits, but because the initial deposits weren't part of the money supply, like they literally, money was printed or created out of thin air in this case, because the Federal Reserve took it from their vaults or wherever that don't exist or printed it off of their special paper. Okay. And they deposited that in, we need to include that first deposit as part of the change, okay? Okay. And so we get a change of 4, and we knew that the quantity of money before was 90, now it's going to be 94. So then when we resolve for the equilibrium interest rate, we get I star equals 100 minus 94, I star equals 6 or 6%. Okay, so the interest rate fell by 4%. Now, does that make sense intuitively? Like, what did we talk about? If the quantity of money is going to increase, all else equal, and our money demand is decreasing, or as the quantity of money goes up, the interest rate has to fall as far as money demand goes. So there we go. We're good as far as that goes. Then you might, on a future question, we're going to move on today, but have this in the background, write this down about how you could do it yourself. The next question might be, how is this going to impact the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, right? If interest rates fall, what happens? It leads to a change in investment, which leads to a change in consumption, which leads to a change in aggregate demand, right? Okay. We're going to talk more about that today. So, yeah.
What are the How would it have differed if it had said like the government sells?
Yeah, if they sell, then they're taking money out of, it would be, oh, is this right? Okay. I think it would work just in the exact reverse way. So we're gonna say that the money supply is going to decrease by that amount. Now, when you go take 420, you're gonna, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But it's like they're drawing, they have to draw down their reserves. And so they can't loan out as much money in the future. So it's like they're, we're gonna say that the money supply changes in the same way, just the other way. So it would decrease by 4 million. That's a good question. Okay. Okay. All right, so this was kind of a more in-depth question than what we've been doing as far as review goes, but I just want to be like, give you a first shot at like, this is the level of things that we want to be thinking about, and we're gonna really need to be connecting chapter 18 and 19 together with chapter 16, okay? Okay. All right, let's get started on monetary policy. So this is all new stuff, or this is some review stuff because we kind of talked about a little bit of the Federal Reserve last week. So what is monetary policy? The actions the Federal Reserve takes to manage the money supply and interest rates to pursue macroeconomic policy goals. Kind of talked about that some, but just putting it in definition. In practice, we just talked about how there was a recent adjustment to the reserve requirement to 0. So that's something that just recently happened, and also target inflation rate of 2%. Actually is probably about to be adjusted. I think like on Wednesday or something like that. But usually, and that for pretty much all of time, it's been about 2%. Is the targeted inflation goal. So obviously it's not being hit right now because inflation's like somewhere like 6 or 7%, which is really high for the United States. And just a review of the tools that can be used by the Federal Reserve. They can change the reserve requirement, right? If they increase the reserve requirement, that decreases the eventual money supply. They can change the discount rate. Okay, same, it goes in the same direction. If you increase the discount rate, that will decrease the eventual money supply. And they can change open market operations. Okay, so that's what we just talked about today. T-bills being bought and sold, bonds being bought and sold, US government securities being bought and sold in general. That is what we just talked about, and that is the main lever that gets used typically. Like this is something that's done every second of every day to try and balance the money supply. So, and actually, so I don't know if anybody here watches financial news, but it's a really big thing in the finance economics news right now, news cycle right now. On Wednesday, I think they're going to announce that they're going to increase the amount of bonds that they are buying back. They're trying to lower the interest rate, basically. Or sorry. Yeah, I think that's right. They're going to change. They're going to, for the first time in a very, very long time, they're going to drastically change the amount of bonds that they buy and sell. So keep an eye out for that if you care about that. Okay. So that's kind of just like big picture overview of the things that we've talked about. Okay. Now we're going to talk about money demand, which we have talked about a little bit, but just more explicitly, because I realized on Thursday last week that there were still some questions about this. So you can think of this as review. But first we have the interest rate, which is the opportunity cost of holding money, which is just the price, okay? And then we have the quantity of money, right? And money is a normal good in the sense that as the quantity of money increases, demand for money falls, okay? sorry. As the interest rate increases, demand for money falls, okay? So it has a downward slope, it has a negative slope, okay? And this just works just like any other market. So if on that last question that we just went over, you were like, wait, I don't know how to do this first part. It's just a simple singular market, okay? Just like the labor market that we talked about, okay? It's just a single market. Okay, revisiting the shifters of money demand. So the first thing that we can shift money demand is aggregate price level. Okay, so if basically if people think that inflation, this is just if there's going to be inflation, which we talked about, or deflation, negative inflation, right? If there's changes in real GDP, which is just change in national income, right? And a change in income is a shifter of demand, okay? The greater the quantity of goods and services consumers purchase, the larger the quantity of money they will want to hold, okay? Because to use, to buy US goods, you need US dollars, right? And we talked about that, and we talked about why that means that the gold standard doesn't really mean anything. But that's what we're going for here. So if you want more US goods, then you need more US money to buy those goods. Okay, so if real GDP goes up, demand for money, US currency goes up. Okay, changes in money technology. So we talked about some of this, but increased availability and capability of credit cards and tech reduces the quantity of money consumers need to hold. Basically, the idea here is that it's really costly. It used to be really costly to go to the bank and be like, I want to move this money from my savings or from my cash and put it in my checking account, right? And we think of what's our checkable deposits, and we have two types of money supply. We have our savings and time deposits, and we have our checking account. But as money technology increases, you can get a credit card, which is basically just a short-term loan that as long as you pay it off, you don't have any interest rate on it, right? The demand for money decreases, okay? And that's just a taste and preference change, really, right? That's all that it comes down to. Then the last one, this is one that I kind of put in with money technology, but I'm gonna break it out here because your book does too. It's institutional change, okay? The first, like the big example here is that, can't remember when this happened, but checking accounts used to not be allowed to have interest. Like, so now if you have a checking account, you might get like 0.025%, which is really 0.0025 like interest rate on your loan, right? Or on your checking, which means that it bears interest over time. So if you have that, it might make it more, you might be more enticed to put money in your checking account, which will increase the money supply, like maybe just a little bit, right? Because it's a small number. But there are institutional changes that happen over long periods of time that might change the demand for money, okay? These are all changes in demand for money, okay? Next time we ask a question, or on the test when I ask you a question about like understanding the changes in money demand, I want you to nail this one, because these are the 4 changes, okay? Get those examples in your head so that when you go through it, you can be like automatic. If this is like, I'm looking for change in money demand, one of these 4 is on the list. Got it. Yep. Wait, it's worth less if inflation goes up?
Why does money demand for money down?
If inflation goes down? Yeah, because, so, wait, goes up or down? Just, you're saying I just said this now. Okay, well then, thank you, because I might have misspoke. This is the interest rate. If the interest rate goes down, which is the price of money, the quantity of money increases, which just is the relationship between money demand. Okay, so not inflation, because I'm actually about to say the exact opposite right here. Okay, so if you think that prices, the price level tomorrow is going to be higher, right? then today you're gonna want more money to spend it. That's just like what we talked about in the past. If you, for any market, if you think that the price of that good is going to be higher tomorrow, then you want to spend the money today. So I think this is right, but if you think that tomorrow the aggregate price level is going to be higher, today you want, your money demand will be higher, like it'll shift to the right. Okay, I see some people nodding, but I'm not sure, so I can double check that at some point. Okay. Yeah, so all of these are kind of like new and specific, but really they're just the same changes in demand and supply that we learned in unit 1. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to like connect it back to. But if you're like Jacob, I hated unit 1, then I guess just focus on these. Okay. Any questions about these? Okay, and I hope you understand like what kind of like what I'll be looking for, like what, why we need to know these, how they connect to what we're going to be working on, and like how you can do well understanding these. Okay, the next one, money supply controlled by the Fed or another central bank. Just to be clear here, central bank, like to be a central bank, what it means, or a central authority or a central figure, like the term that we're using here, it means that you are in absolute control of the thing. Okay, so it's like a command economy, like if that means anything to you. Like the Federal Reserve controls the money supply. Okay, they have absolute authority to go around and do whatever they want with the money supply specifically. Okay, the money supply influences interest rates. Nobody else in the entire world has the authority to manipulate the money supply in the United States economy. Okay, there's only one entity, and it is the Federal Reserve. They control the money supply. Now, how do they do that? They don't just go around and burn up money and add money and just drop it in places, right? It's a little more nuanced than that, but they're the ones who are the only ones who have the authority to manipulate and change the money supply. Okay, so what does that mean? Boom, we just have money supply, quantity of money. Okay, there's no relationship between the interest rate and the money supply, which means it's perfectly inelastic. Now the money supply can shift, right? Like if the reserve requirement goes down, then the money supply will go over here, right? Which we just saw. If the reserve requirement goes up, or open market operations take place, then the money supply shifts to the left, right? But that's from the Fed doing that, okay? Okay. We talked about this some, but how does this relate to aggregate demand? Right, remember aggregate demand equation is Y equals C plus I plus G plus net exports. Or when I say aggregate demand, I really mean this is just the output equation here, but that's going to affect aggregate demand through consumption and investment, okay? Because as interest rates go up, the price of a loan goes up. A loan is a normal good. When the price of a normal good goes up, we use less of it, which means investment will go down. And then that leads to a reduction in consumption spending as well. We'll talk more about that when we go over chapter 17, like why it's like investment then consumption. But you can just think of both of them happening. Okay, like that's what I like to think of. So, for example, if for some reason we had the money supply decrease, right? If the money supply goes down, that leads to interest rates falling. Then we would have aggregate demand shift to the left. Okay. But it's because investment and then consumption spending falls. Okay, let's talk about monetary policy and kind of how it works. So let's say the economy is in this state. Or let's call this real GDP. Okay. So we have aggregate demand. We have short run aggregate supply. And then for whatever reason, okay, something happened. We don't know what, because we're starting out here at this point. For whatever reason, this is where the long run aggregate supply is. Okay, so potential output is right here. Short run, or let's call it current output, YC, is right here. Okay. What kind of gap is this? Inflationary gap. Really good. Okay. Wait. What did we just say? Wait, did everybody say inflationary? Did I say it backwards then? Or is the, hold on. If current output is less than potential output. It's a recessionary gap. So if I said it wrong, I'm so sorry. I don't know. Maybe I did, but I just looked over the notes yesterday. But everybody was super like on it. So okay, just to be clear here, if current output is less, if current output, whatever we've said in the past, if current output is less than potential output, that's a recessionary gap. Okay. I'll double check and correct any notes that might be wrong. Okay, so this is a recessionary gap. Now, if the self-correcting mechanism were, if nothing were to happen, right, we could get back to aggregate, long-run aggregate supply, right? Can somebody briefly tell me how that would work? Like just quickly in words?
You're saying like using monetary policy?
No, self-correcting mechanism. Yeah.
Since it's up here, this goes down. Simply this is it wrong. So it won't have it kind of to the right.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's it.
Yep, that's it. So we have equilibrium wages are too high, or wages are sticky and they're too high. We would like for them to decrease. When they decrease, that shifts, that's a shifter of short run aggregate supply, right? And short run aggregate supply would shift to the right. Oops, that was a terrible line. Right, until it gets to the long run equilibrium. Okay, and then that would cause a drop in the price level. All right. Okay, well, let's say since the Federal Reserve, for thought out reasons that some people disagree with, they want an annual inflation rate of 2%. So they don't want to see that price level drop. They don't want to see the price level drop, because the price level drop means like a negative inflation rate, right? Which their goal in inflation is 2% every year. So if they didn't want to see that drop in the price level, what could they do to get the economy back to long run equilibrium and have the price level increase at least a little bit? They could buy treasury bills. Okay, so Blaine says buy treasury bills. If you buy treasury bills, let's talk about it. Okay, let's put it on a new thing here. Oops, close. Okay, let's bring up our steps. Okay, so we have a recessionary gap. That's the first thing that's going on. We identify the gap, okay? Then we say, let's walk through buy treasury bills. The Fed buys treasury bills, right? 3, if you buy treasury bills, what's going to happen to the money supply? The money supply will eventually increase because we just went through an example of that, right? We just did that example. So that means money supply goes up, which if the money supply goes up, that means interest rates fall. And if interest rates fall, what does that mean? Investment goes up. Consumption would also go up eventually. Okay? Which means that aggregate demand goes up or shifts right. Okay. So that looks to be good based on what we're talking about here. If we have an eventual change in aggregate demand, and the price level would go up, right? Which maybe that's what the Fed wants because they want an inflation rate of 2%. And we're at a new point. We're at a higher price level and we are back at potential output. Okay? So now every one of you guys can go be chairman or chairwoman or chairperson of the Fed. Boom. Okay? So submit your applications. Any questions about that? That's all that it is. Okay. I say that, and I know that when we talk about this on Wednesday and we do an example, a lot of people are gonna forgot, or so I wanted to sink in here that literally it's just those 5 steps or 6 steps. Yeah. It would just be the opposite, right? It would just be, so the first thing you do is identify the gap. The second thing that you, like, if you wanted to write them out in general, it would be the first thing is identify, and when I do the notes, just like I did for last Wednesday, I'll add these notes like these notes onto the slides. Okay. So you identify the gap. Then the Federal Reserve does something that will change the money supply, which changes interest rates, which changes investment, and then consumption, which changes aggregate demand. Okay, that's it. That's all the monetary policy is, at least insofar as we're going to talk about it for this class. Okay, I guarantee you, you're going to be tested on all aspects of this. So like, sleep with it, like remember it. Okay, like it's something that is going to be important, but this is all that it is. Christopher.
Do investment and consumption always go hand in hand?
Yes, in this class, yes. Yep. Yeah, it's because actually, like, the investment spending going up is technically what's driving consumption spending going up. Because if you think about it, as businesses grow and they produce more, then there are going to be people who want to consume more.
Inflation different?
The interest rate, not inflation. Okay, everybody remember, pi is inflation. I is the interest rate, okay? I think your book might do this, NIR. So Achieve might do this too, the nominal interest rate. If you go take any other economics class after this class, you will never see NIR ever again. It's always going to be little I for the nominal interest rate.
How does interest rate play into investment?
So for investment, it's really straightforward, right? Investment spending, investment, you can think of as loans, the amount of loans that businesses take out, because that's what an investment is. Like a business can take out a loan from the bank, a business can take out a loan from people in the form of stock purchases and sales, right? If the interest rate goes down, which is the price of a loan, right? Like everybody here, well, maybe not, because this school is super cheap relatively to like a private school. You get like school loans, or you have a credit card loan, like your credit card has an interest rate, right? So the price of your loans or investment is the interest rate. So as the interest rate goes down, or the price of a loan, more loans will be like taken, right? So investment goes up, and then that leads to consumption going up too, because as investment goes up, like output goes up, wages go up, which causes consumption to go up. Okay. So good question. Okay, and so yeah, if there was an inflationary gap and we wanted to do, which we're going to talk about on this next slide here, it's just the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys write out what would happen, what the 6 steps would be, or what you can do 5 steps, 1 step. I don't care. It's the story, right? I want you to tell me, and you can talk to the people sitting next to you, what would happen if we have an inflationary gap? Okay, potential output is lower than current output because of some shock, something that happened in the economy, right? And I need to make that clear, right? Something happened in the economy, like aggregate demand shifted or wages shifted, like wages shifted, causing SRAS to shift. Like something happened, there was a shock to the economy that got us out of the long run equilibrium. So now we have an inflationary gap, like, for example, a giant pandemic stopped global supply lines. Huh? This is an inflationary gap, right? Anytime potential is lower than current. Okay. So you guys write out what would happen, how the Federal Reserve could go about getting us back to long run equilibrium. Okay, I'll give you guys like 2 or 3 minutes to go through that. Because it's like the government has the right to purchase treasury bills at any point in time. So they're like an investment vehicle. So people want treasury bills. I'll talk about it when, like, it's a good question. We'll talk about it in like 30 seconds. Okay, 30 more seconds, then we'll talk about Christopher's question, and then we'll talk about this example. Okay. Okay, so Christopher asked a good question. I can explain real quick. So how do treasury bills affect the money supply? Like, why is that the case? Okay, so we talked about what treasury bills are, right? They're an investment vehicle. They're something that anybody can purchase. Typically, you go to your bank to purchase them, but I think technically you can purchase them directly from the government if you want to. And they're a safe investment. Basically, they'll pay out as long as you think that the US government will exist into the future. But because they're a safe investment, they have a very low yield, right? Their interest rate is generally low, okay? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, real quick, the riskier an investment is, the higher the interest rate is. We're not talking about like the aggregate interest rate, just the price of that specific interest rate. So if you went to the bank and you got an interest rate on your loan for school, and you talked to your friend and your friend's interest rate was half yours, that means that the bank thinks that you're about twice as likely to default on the loan as your friend is. Okay, so your bank thinks that you're a riskier investment than your friend is. But people want these loans, or people want these T-bills because they're a safe investment vehicle. It's better than just holding nothing, right? Like holding money. The government then has the right to purchase those bills back from you after a certain period of time. They don't always have to, but they have the right of first purchase. Okay, and so to buy a T-bill, you have to give the government money. That money then goes out of the money supply, which starts a chain reaction that we just talked about. The same thing happens when the government wants to buy the T-bills back from you. They give you money in return to get the bill back, the certificate. They're not certificates anymore, but they used to be like certificates of deposit. And that, when they give you that money, you deposit it in your bank, and that starts the money creation process. Okay, which is what we just talked about today. So that's how it influences the money supply. Okay, so talk back to this question specifically. Okay, somebody tell me so first thing we needed to do, we all did that together. We identified the gap. It's an inflationary gap. What's the next thing? Sell T-bills, right? So open market operations. Okay, just to be clear, we don't need to do open market operations, but it is the most likely scenario, right? So if you were like, oh, I put the reserve ratio changes, that's fine too, because that also works. Or if you said, oh, I put the deposit rate goes, oh geez, the deposit, if we want to increase, let me think here. You want to decrease your demands? We want the deposit rate to go up or the reserve ratio to go up. If you said that too, that's fine. Okay. Okay, sell T-bills. What does that do? What's the next thing that happens? Money supply goes down, which means that the interest rate goes up, right? If we draw a little market over here, we shift to the right. Oh geez, I need to make this bigger. Sorry, guys. Right, money demand, money supply. Okay, interest rate will go up. Okay, so interest rates go up. And then what happens? What's the next thing that happens? Investment and then consumption go down, okay? Because the interest rates on loans are higher. That's the price of a loan, less investment. If I was going to go to the bank, maybe I was like right up, like think about it like this. Maybe I was right on the edge of like, oh, getting a loan out to open up a new restaurant on Franklin, right? But it's pretty risky, right? You see that you go home for the summer and half the restaurants, I guess most of you guys are freshmen. You'll see what this happen next year. All of your favorite restaurants, besides like the ones that have been there forever, like Med Deli, will be gone next year. Like over the summer, they just go out of business. It's like, so I was like right on the edge of doing it. And then I go to the bank and the interest rates went up. It's higher than I thought it was going to be. Well, now I'm not going to get that loan anymore, which isn't going to increase investment, right? So that's the idea. Investment will go down and then consumption will also go down. That will lead to a shift in aggregate demand to the left or the right. To the left, right? Until we get to right about here, if everything worked out, and that would cause the price level to go down. Okay. You might be like, well, wait, Jacob, I thought we said that the interest rate, the inflation rate target is 2%. So why would they want inflation to go down? Well, maybe this is like, maybe when they used to be in long run equilibrium, they were down here or something like that, right? Like we had some shock that happened that took us out of our long run equilibrium point. Okay. So sometimes they will do contractionary monetary policy, although it's generally pretty rare that this happens. But they're going to do it starting on Wednesday. So I guess it's not that rare, but But yeah, so that's the idea. Maybe we were in a point where we had low, like where we had like a good 2% inflation, and now inflation is really high. And so we want to kind of bring that number back down. Okay. And that's called contractionary monetary policy. Okay. So when you see an inflationary gap, you do contractionary monetary policy. When you see a recessionary gap, you do expansionary monetary policy. Okay. Last thing that I want to do, we're going to go over one more example. Okay. Shoot, why did I not? I just want to put one in here. Hold on one sec. Forgot to put the thing in. YP equals. Okay, YP equals 400. So I want you to solve for the short run equilibrium output. And then I want you to tell me how big the gap is. And then I just want you in words on your notebook to write out what very briefly, what kind of monetary policy would have to happen. Okay. So you don't have to go through all the steps. Just tell me what type of monetary policy would happen. In the back of your mind, know what the steps are. You're definitely going to need to know them, right? But yeah, so just work on this question. And then I want you to graph this too. Graph this as well. Okay, so you have the price level. And that's the last thing. What? Yeah. Oh, just an example. Yeah. The reserve ratio goes up. And the money multiplier goes down, which means that the money supply will go down. Okay, let's talk about this quick. All right. So we have aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and then we're given potential output. That equation also just tells us what long run aggregate supply is, right? Did that connect for everybody? Right, long run aggregate supply is where potential output is, so that's kind of how you're gonna see that equation. So we have, I want you to draw and I wanted you to solve for the equilibrium. So to solve for the equilibrium, right, we have 1,200 SRAS AD. So the current output, to solve for, we need to just set the two equations equal to each other. We get 1,000 minus 2YC equals 200 plus 2YC. So then we get 4. Current output equals 800. Okay, YC equals 200. Okay, so if potential output is greater than current output, that means that we have a, what kind of gap? Recessionary gap, okay? Recessionary. Yeah. This means that current output or potential output somewhere over here. Okay. And then briefly, if we have a recessionary gap, what kind of monetary policy do we need to do? Expansionary monetary policy, if we want to get back to long run equilibrium. Okay. Okay. And just remember that if we do expansionary monetary policy, that leads to an eventual increase in the price level or inflation. But if we were to just let everything go and not do anything, in this case, that would lead to short run aggregate supply shifting down, which would lead to a decrease in the price level. We'd still get back to the long run output, but at a lower price level. Okay. Okay, so hopefully in the back of your head, you're starting to think about all of the things that like you could connect up and how like the types of questions that could be asked. But it all starts out with knowing all of the steps and knowing them backwards and forwards and how they connect with each other. Yeah. Yep. And the self-correcting mechanism, what happens is, I think it was you that asked me for the definition last week. It's right. Eventually wages will change, right? When wages change, because in the short run, they're sticky. The prices don't change like quickly, right? We talked about the different reasons why that might be. But when they do change, that'll eventually affect short run aggregate supply. When input prices or wages change, that eventually affects short run aggregate supply, which will shift aggregate supply. Okay. Okay, good question. Okay, I'm going to, so we're going to do a quick summary, just connecting it back to chapter 18. The Fed uses its tools to influence the money supply. If they don't, the economy will self-correct, leading to a price level change, inflation or deflation, just in the opposite direction that they could do themselves. We already talked about the next bullet. I really quickly want to get started, just give you guys an introduction on fiscal policy. So that's the last thing that you're going to need for the problem set 5. So if you want to get if you're working through the problems, fiscal policy is very similar to monetary policy in that the goal is to influence aggregate output, but fiscal policy is going to be a little bit different because it's the entity that is enacting fiscal policy is the government, okay? The federal government, which is separate from the Federal Reserve, okay? So you think of it as literally Congress, right? Congress sets a budget for things. We're going to talk more about this on Wednesday, but Congress sets a budget that determines spending. They also determine tax rates for capital gains taxes, for why am I blanking? Income tax. Oh, what other taxes? They have taxes. They have import and export duties and taxes. They set all of those. Okay, so that's what fiscal policy is. And taxes affect consumption, sometimes investment, and they also can influence aggregate demand through just straight up spending more money. Okay, Like if they decide that they're going to hire more people to work for the federal government, boom, spend more money, there are more people working, that's gonna increase government spending, right? Which government purchases or government transfers, you can think of government transfers as things like social security, kind of, Medicare, definitely, Medicaid, definitely. Unemployment benefits, definitely. Other types of social welfare, like, I'm trying to remember some of the like strict actual names of these things and not their like colloquialisms, but I can't, like food credits and stuff like that. All of those are going to be government transfers that will affect spending, government spending G directly, or you can have taxes that will affect consumption. Okay, so it'll affect consumption indirectly, which affects aggregate demand. Okay, so how is that different than monetary policy? There's a different entity enacting the plan, and there are different levers to use. Okay, remember, fiscal policy does not influence the money supply in any way. Okay, so if I see that on any question on anywhere, it's going to make me want to claw my eyes out if we get there. Okay, I'm serious. Fiscal policy does not, like the US government has nothing to do with the money supply. The only person, the only entity that controls the money supply is the central bank. They're the only legal entity in the entire world that has the ability to influence the money supply directly. Okay? Okay, that's all that I had for today. Reminders, start on problems at 5. Get started on it. Don't wait till Wednesday to get started on it. I know we haven't done fiscal policy yet, but you should be able to do all the other questions, okay? Office hours today from 1 to 12. I think Ishan's are from 1 to 2. Test is in 2 weeks. Make sure you have chapters 12 through 16 down pat. If you don't, you need to soon, okay? Because you need to understand and practice 17 through 20, maybe 21. I can't remember if we're doing 21 as well. All right, have a good week or have a good day. I'll see you guys on Wednesday if I don't see you at office hours.
When we're solving for output gaps, do you want those in percents?
One more?
Percents or like actual values? So right here is the actual output is, or the potential is 7,000.
Yeah.
The actual is
Yes,
5,500. Is the gap 1,500 or is it? a percentage?
1,500 is fine. But if you did that, that's cool too. Like,
Okay.
don't worry about redoing it there.
Could you go all the way back to the money to, or the shifters? So how do feds control everything?
Yes, what's up? She's talking about one last thing. And then, wait, the shifters or the
Or
feds?
the feds, yeah,
The
the
feds
feds,
levers that.
the discount rates and open market offers. and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that.
I'll get 1 sec. Or do you just need to know what the 3 are?
Yeah.
So it's the discount rate, the reserve requirement or the reserve ratio,
Reserve rates.
and the open market operations, which is buying and selling T-bills.
So, and then for treasury bills,
Yeah.
Can the government force a buy or sell? Like an
I mean, I
option?
think technically, yes, but normally, no. Like what they'll do is they'll just raise the rate, which gets more people to sell them early back to them. Like what, like, so you have a rate, you have a bill and it has a 10-year rate on it, right? How they usually will get people to buy or sell the bills more quickly is just raise the price or lower the price of them. That's it. Does that make sense?
yeah, and do banks do it for diversification purposes, or is it because you have to do it?
No, I don't think they have to buy them. They just, yeah, there's like, so think about it like this. If a bank has the ability to get a T-bill that has 90 days on it, and they know that they're gonna have like a bunch of money, they can either one, put that in a risky investment, which is probably illegal, or they can put it in a short-term T-bill, which is totally legal and collect some interest on that money.
Mhm.
Or they can just leave it sitting.
Mm.
You know, they're gonna choose the middle one, right? They're gonna choose to put their money in the T-bill. Yeah, and if you take 420 or you go take a finance class,
Mhm.
like a money and banking class through the business school, they'll talk about like this, why they do this and how they do it and the ways they maximize it. They'll talk about it a lot.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
cool, good question.
So on the question, for the first question in poll everywhere,
Yep.
like why would electricity affect short run